Right. So thank you very much for joining us. I'm absolutely delighted that you guys have stuck with us, and I'm very pleased that quite a few people have rejoined the call after the break. So thank you very much for that. The whole purpose of this is around collaboration. In other words, taking action. We're not here just to talk about things. We're here to identify new things, open up new opportunities. It's a really frank, sort of open and honest discussion. Our credibility comes from 200 company turnarounds and applying an approach which was pretty cutting edge in 2006 and refining that to come up with a winning thinking program, which is a summation of why businesses, actions and the challenge get misaligned, which I think is very relevant to today. I'm absolutely delighted that Kevin Gaskell is joining us today. It's four very impressive past, real sort of great CV. Very interesting in terms of turnaround of Porsche quite a few years ago, and also sailed the Atlantic, which for me is a big tip.
Rode the Atlantic.
Rode the Atlantic, yeah, rode the Atlantic, completely different. So got that wrong. And Ton Christianse, who's equally impressive turnaround CEO, worked for a lot of very large multinationals. So they're coming along, really sort of, but slightly provocative term to sort of head to head in terms of are our leadership skills up to scratch, and if so, what are the things we might look to develop? But before we do that, just to recap the main themes that we've coming out of the new now. So I think one of the main ones is around rediscovering intimacy, which is a bit of an odd word, which David McLean defined the other day, and I was quite pleased that it was what I thought it meant. And I think also the link with profits and relationships as well, and a rediscovery of connection between us. Alongside that, there's been some fairly major buying shifts. So look at the way people are buying cars and a lot of other products. That's important. Doing the right thing, localization and community is increased in importance. And there's one thing which we've actually added to this list, which is a failure to take action, which David McLean will which has actually become part of the new now. And we're talking about new now as in now. So. And I think that in summary, the survival very much depends upon taking new action. And we'll talk about doing that, doing the right thing, profit and relationships. So that's a summary of what we've learned to date. Kevin Gaskell will kick off. Ton will contribute his 5 minutes. I'll contribute a few thoughts, and then David will wrap up. So hopefully we'll try and stick to the timing of 5 minutes and include myself in that. So over to you, Kevin. Really looking forward to what you've got to contribute.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the invitation. I think my view on the current situation is that it is a crisis. COVID is a crisis. It's a crisis we've never seen before as business community. But then I look back on my career and recognize in the 1980s, I was fighting Black Wednesday. In the 1990s, it was Black Monday, or was that the other way around? We went through a historical recession where we saw interest rates at 15%, we saw unemployment at 11%. I can remember running Porsche and looking at the change in the exchange rate when we came out of the ERM, and our cost of sales went up overnight by 20-25%. So these kind of crises do arrive. They are part of being a leader of a business. What's different about the current one? Well, it came almost without warning. As we've just said, I rode into the Caribbean in February of this year and got off the boat expecting to have a great year. My businesses were all looking up. Boris had just been elected. We're hoping for a smooth as possible Brexit. And then the world stopped. What do you do? Well, the first thing we did was defend the businesses we have. I currently chair 5 companies. It's about defense. So interrogate our income statement. Where can we reduce costs? How can we manage our cost base? How can we retain cash? What are the discretionary expenditure that we will stop? And we will not pay bonuses. We will not pay dividends. We look at every line in our income statement. We look at where we are. What can we do to secure our business? So we build a 100-day defend plan, and that's what we did. And that got us through to be in a pretty good position, actually. The second part is attack. Attack means determination of success, what is it going to look like? Because every crisis creates an opportunity. There are businesses which are going to do very well and are doing very well through the COVID crisis. How do we become one of those businesses? So we look very carefully within our business. We start with communication. You know, there is only one version of the truth. And so we're very open with our teams. We're very open with our clients. We explain who we are, what we're doing. How are we going to change our business to serve them? So communicate, 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 and communicate forwards. My belief is I should always tell my team what we're going to do as a business before I tell the outside world. So communication is key, making sure everybody understands what the future looks like. The second part is client relationships. Actually going out of our way to speak with each and every client. Connecting with them so that they understand what decisions we will be making and how we will be changing our business in order to provide a better service to them, but also in order to make sure that we have a long-term partnership. The third piece I call courage. You know, a lot of people are panicking at the minute. Well, panic won't help anything. It won't help anything at all. So whilst you should never waste a good crisis, because the turbulence that's created can be harnessed as energy, we use that energy to look to the long term. So let's not make decisions now based on short-term challenges, based on short-term threats. Let's understand where we're going in the medium and longer term. And sometimes that's kind of counterintuitive. People say, no, I have to do it now, I have to do it. No. Let's just understand where we're going in the long term. One version of the truth. We're honest and open about who we are and where we're going. The second part is, what is our vision of success? What does that look like? And we paint that as a picture. This is what we will look like. This is actually what we'll sound like. This is how we will relate to our customers. And thirdly, this is what it will feel like to be in a successful business. And we discuss that openly. So it's having the courage to slow things down, to understand where we're going, and then build the business accordingly. And that's what we've been focused on in our business over the last 100 days. We built our 100-day defense plan. Now we're in our attack plan. They do overlap, but now we're in the attack phase, and we're building businesses. And you know, one of my companies has grown 100% this year. And it's not a startup, but what we did was understand where the demand was. And what we did was position our team to be able to take advantage of that demand. Other of my businesses, one's having a tough time, but we're changing the model. We're thinking differently because we have to. So have the courage to determine a vision of success and have the courage to make change. Do not be afraid to make change. Tomorrow's world will not be the same as yesterday's world. And it won't be yesterday plus a bit. It'll be really quite different. So within our companies, what we're doing is we defend what we've got. Then we attack the position in the market that we want to adopt. Clear communication, one version of the truth, a clear vision of success, and then communicate to make sure everybody is involved in the plan and in delivering that plan. So far, that's working.
Great. Thank you very much, Kevin. That's very clear. So in terms of yourself personally, because I think one of the challenges is actually what have we learned from this and what are we doing differently? What have you realized in your own your own experience where your leadership skills are broken and where you've changed your style to suit the current situation?
Yeah, I think for me it's slightly different because I'm chairman, but helping my CEOs, well, I can see the different personalities in the different businesses. And one of the CEOs, for example, needs a lot of support operationally. They have grown their business through their vision of what it could be. But when the world changes very quickly around you, you need to adapt operationally. And that business has needed operational support. Another business, confidence has been hammered. And we went through some quite difficult weeks where the senior leadership team had actually lost their confidence. And so that was a case of sitting down and thinking again about where we can go and actually re-energizing our own excitement about what this business could be. And that particular CEO came back to me just a couple of weeks ago and said, I'm so excited about where we're going now. And when I asked them, to compare and contrast with where they were a few weeks ago. I said, yeah, because we've taken a deep breath, we've stepped outside the business, and we've appreciated that with clarity of thought, with careful planning, we can get still to where we want to go. We've adapted the model, we've changed the commercials on the model, but the customers are reacting positively to that because we brought them on the journey.
Yeah.
So most of the change has been around communication.
Okay. And what have you learned personally? Is there anything personally you've learned where you've felt that you've had to sharpen your own pencil?
Well, I think I've learned that, there's no such thing as a new crisis. The issues ultimately are the same. And whilst COVID is exceptional in as much as the cause, the net result, the effect on our business of cash flow challenge, of clients deferring contracts, of difficulty in sourcing raw materials. I mean, something we've learned is how far some of the materials that we thought we sourced in the UK actually come before they get to us.
Yeah.
And, they're stuck at ports all around the world. So again, it's not so much learning again as reminding yourself of the basics and the fundamentals of running an effective business.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Thank you for your contribution. So, Tom, over to you. Looking forward to what you think, contrary to what Kevin says, or just your own thoughts, please. What are your observations?
Well, I think a little bit of both, in all fairness. I think quite a few things that Kevin just mentioned do resonate. Defining your purpose and trying to communicate it with your team. I think that's all very, very essential. But I also heard a couple of things that made me think, like we have had crisis before, right? And this is just another crisis in a long range of crises, and therefore stuff that we might have done in the past, like the 100 days plan that has been mentioned, or stepping back and take your time to redefine. This is concepts and this is wording used that could potentially, I don't say it happens with Kevin, but it could potentially stop people from taking action. So I would say, it's a different situation in all fairness. We have seen crisis. Sometimes the crisis was just affecting the financial markets or other particular parts of our global ecosystem. But in this particular case, it actually has affected everyone, not just your business, but also your relationships at home, your neighbors, people that are not in the financial markets at all, people that are not even in business or whatever, in public services. Right? This is, as far as I can see, at least in our lifetime, the first time that this crisis has affected everyone. And that makes it, to my opinion, completely different. I also think that this is actually not a crisis. It's actually the kickoff of a new era where we will constantly live in a situation where change and adaptation is important. So I don't think it's re-establishing purpose, just re-establishing your strategy and then coming up with a plan. I think it's getting into a mode of constant fluctuation and movement and adaptation to things that happen in the marketplace and in your private life. Other than that, I think within that time frame, within that framework, I was meant to say the things that Kevin mentioned, like courage, defining your purpose, talk to your own people before you go out in the market. I think that is all extremely relevant, especially now we live in these turbulent times. But I do believe it's no longer the old, sort of concepts, if you like, that will help us much further going forward. And I think there is a danger of inaction by trying to take too much time or using the language of doing a step back and define 100 days plan. I think we should not be afraid to take imperfect action, even if we know 80%. It's just time to move on. It takes 66 days before people actually have changed the behavior in a way that they don't come back anymore. So that this sort of behavioral change that is here to stay. The lockdown has been more than 100 days. Things we have seen now in how people, customers actually behave is not going away. This is here with us for the foreseeable future. If we would have made a 100-day plan 100 days ago, it would already be outdated.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Tom.
Just to build on that, I agree with you, Tom. I mean, when I say 100-day plan, we start doing stuff on day one. We don't spend 100 days to build a plan. Our 100-day plan is how much are we going to change this business immediately, and we put a back end of 100 days on it so that people aren't thinking down the road somewhere. No, guys, it has to be finished by then. And some of the changes that we made in some of our business were really quite profound. Changing business models, closing offices. We moved one business completely out of the office, and we did it in 2 weeks. Big battle with the landlord. You know, we're not popular with the landlord, but that was the decision. Get out. And so I completely agree with you. And it is, yeah, you're right. It's very different because it does affect our private lives. I am fed up to the back teeth. This is my home office. I've seen this room enough now. I'm going to London on Monday. Normally I hate London because I don't like cities, but I'm quite looking forward to it. I want to get out there and see some people. So, you know.
Well, you can see me. You know, I'm here next week, so we can definitely have a coffee.
Yeah.
Re-energize. I mean, that's another thing. How do you keep the energy level up? That is one of the challenges, because people, I'm not convinced that everybody can go and do home working and it will be fine. I'm not convinced, because I think, and you know, as good as Zoom is, it's not a straight compensation for meeting around a table. I'm desperately trying to get the board of one of my companies together physically at the moment, and half of the board is a very large institutional investor. They came into the business last November. I haven't met them yet. It was November. I see them a lot on Zoom, but I haven't sat in a room with them.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the things that we're pushing is to get back to some degree of physical interaction, physical contact, because I do think that's important. But yeah, big decisions made. Close offices. Wow.
I like your use of the word re-energize. I've met a lot of people and spoken to a lot of people also on Zoom or phone and even live that almost have given up to a certain extent. You know, they're sort of used to a very slow pace. They're used to their leadership, you know, just waiting because, you know, they're on furlough, or there are other schemes where, you know, the banks and the government are, you know, somehow helping them out for a short period of time. And they really don't get into second gear at all. They're just sitting back and just seem to wait. And of course, we have seen all the announcements. You mentioned London. You know, a lot of offices here. People don't have to come back before the year end. People don't have to come back at all. And I don't say that it's not right that in the new world people can work more from home. But if you tell them, you know, you don't have to come back before the year end. You never have to come back. That wording, that sort of language, to my opinion, you know, just feeds inaction. And that is really what I sort of tend to feel all around me. This, you know, this lack of just getting in second, third, or even fourth gear to just move forward. So that the re-energize concept, I really resonate with me.
100%, Tom. Yeah, thanks, guys. So just to wrap up this bit, Tom, what do you think the skills are? You've reflected on how you see the differences. What do you think the skills are to? What have you learned yourself personally? What's different?
Well, the thing is that you know, we just refer to as language and the use of language. So that takes you then to the next step with these mantras, right? Where you say, well, we always do it like this, or we have always done it like that. And like anyone else, you know, I'm guilty of you know, of having those mantras imprinted in my brain as well.
Yeah.
And you know, and tend to sort of, you know, live towards them. And one thing that the conversations on the pub and the last sort of, you know, couple of 100 days where you do a lot of reflection have taught me is to go into anything actually with a completely open mind. You know, I tend to believe I'm open-minded. I tend to believe it's part of my culture and background and my personality. And nevertheless, I've, you know, found myself, you know, the last few weeks looking at the mirror and say, no, you think you are, but actually, you know, you still sort of live by those imprinted beliefs. So I think, you know, one of the things I've learned is, you know, to to really go about it with a completely open mind and let yourself be influenced, by all sort of directions and impulses.
Yeah, great. That's fantastic. So, yeah, actually, Tom, can I ask you to just create the summary at the end of this? I know we're halfway through the call, but if you could make if that's okay with you, a few bullets at the end.
I thought it was David's job.
No, yeah. No, if you could, is that okay? Yeah. Anyway, I'll catch you on the hop on that one. Test your leadership there, Tom. My contribution, I think we need to think the unthinkable. I think there's a danger that actually we may be blind to the challenge. So some of the points that Tom made in terms of, talking down the crisis, I think is important. It's very important to recognise what's different about this situation. A lot of people aspects are quite different, and it's very easy to start leading in the rear view mirror. So I think the other thing I'd say is our success depends on our rarely exceeds our level of personal development. And I think what I'd say, I think where the misalignment comes from is around us being too proud. And the problem with pride is we don't see our flaws. It's a dangerous place to be. The other thing I'd like to touch on is also being aware of what drives us. And what I'd originally described as bullshit farms, but actually, to be a bit more polite, deception farms. So when I say deception, I mean bullshit farm, but anyway, one and the same thing. I think the other side of this is also deception artists. I think there's some aspects of leadership which have got so embedded in the mantras that actually leadership has become deceptive as well. And so the challenges in this situation, how do you see it? What's the way of working? How do you build capability in this type of situation? A bit like the way Tom mentioned, in terms of being completely flexible, completely open mind, but also notwithstanding what Kevin was talking about in terms of the structure and the need to make things happen and the basics, get the absolute basics right. The other aspect of this is also critical thinking as well, which I'll touch on. So I think for me, when I go back to when I was 17, I've always, my early career was dominated by manufacturing. I just couldn't understand the way the economy didn't worked with so little manufacturing. Couldn't understand that. How can you have a big economy? And I think that has actually come home to roost. I think if there's a major difference between our economy in the UK and Germany or Holland, for example, much less manufacturing, which is substantially different. And I think that's one thing that's substantially different. I think around the pride, this actually creates what I describe as being deception artists. And there's some real issues that's flagged up, which I think are different. I think the financials of businesses are largely irrelevant now. They need to be rethought almost from scratch. I think our reliance on long-term forecasts is shot to pieces. I spent, like you, Kevin, a long time in the automotive industry, an industry dominated by long-term forecasts. And that's moved to hyper-visibility, to use a different type of term. I think some products are unsustainable. So I think cars are pretty unsustainable, particularly luxury cars, aircraft as well, and the business model that goes with it. This huge monster that sits behind it. So I think this excessive consumption as well has been triggering a lot of demand, which has been challenged as well, and people are just not buying the same junk that they used to. And also the other thing is, the ecosystem that sits around working. If you take Canary Wharf, there's cafes and all the rest of it, vitally important to interaction, well-being, which I think there could be a big dent there. I think around tech as well, tech has overtaken investment in oil, which has had a dramatic shift. And I think we're actually creating what I describe as Ponzi schemes. And I mean Ponzi schemes. You look at the technical definition of a Ponzi scheme in tech, because there isn't enough substance to invest in a lot of those businesses. So I think China as well is a big issue around globalization, which has been majorly challenged. Kept our inflation down for years, but actually now we're in an unenviable position of being totally reliant on China. And China do business like war. They don't do business like us. It's a fight in China, and they have far more aggressive models than Amazon and others. So we need to be aware of that. And I think there's a really big issue around data. So data is actually not for us, it's for tech. But human beings don't need much data to make decisions. So there's a really interesting, I spoke at 4 conferences about that last year, really interesting challenge with that. So going back to one of the points I made, what's driving us? Are we aware of this? A lot of this is around more. More is a mantra that was created in the 1970s. So Tom was talking about mantras. And also in terms of our self-awareness, the US thought when China became rich, they'd start sort of behaving themselves or fitting in more of a Western way of working, which is clearly not the case. But that's the situation, as Tom rightly said, that can create stasis. So how our words are critical. So I think there's an underlying deception farm, which is my polite way of using that less polite word, which is around, we've known about sustainability for 40 years. The oil industry has very successfully covered that up. So I think there's an environmental issue. I think there's the same thing with tech investment. That I think has got the same sort of issues. I think our education system's been highly reliant on self-reliance, when in fact I think we're highly reliant on teams. We're very much more reliant on each other. So as you rightly said, Kevin, our interaction, the need to get back to have re-established relationships critical. I think as well, wokeness is also an attempt to sort of redefine the truth, which really badly does people in with the courage who really want to make things happen. So I think the second part which I wanted to highlight, which was around seeing the situation. So what is actually stopping us from seeing the situation? I think it's this deception. I think these issues were always there. It's just the deception that we've put on top of it, which I've tried to articulate. And there's the things that were always there are things like intimacy, gratefulness, local sustainability. They've always been there. They've just been obfuscated by this sort of deceptive leadership mantra and some of these tech mantras. And I think that's left us a lot of businesses selling the same old stuff. And I think a lot of recent tech is actually now becoming old tech. So I think the challenge with this is making sure that we're not driving our businesses with a rear view mirror. And actually, what's the solution to this? I think it's an analogy which I think is helpful, which is a jazz band. It's an improvising jazz band, which is something has no music. And so it's playing its tune. It's intimate listening to the audience, intimate relationships between the team, and it doesn't change. It takes immediate action, right? And as Ton just said, he made a few comments around some of the statements which cause inaction, but also perfection creates inaction. There's a lot of things which create inaction, which stop us from doing things. And when you become aware of these things, this is what the winning thinking process is all about, which I'll shamelessly talk about, because this is some of the learning which I'll share with you in terms of how do you create this jazz band. And so some of the feedback we've had from this in the last week or so with some extraordinarily successful leaders is simple perspectives, changing perspectives actually create powerful outcomes. Another observation was we see patterns before we see the issues. So when we look at situations, we reflect on what we've seen before. And also we think we know things that we don't know, which is interesting territory. And we join our dots from the imagination. Another bit of feedback, statements that are made like business is good, and people believe it. That's the problem. So I'm not saying this is right or wrong. It's just these statements create stasis. So coming back to the point I made around critical thinking breakthrough, there's a couple of points I want to make here. I don't know if you've automotive, Kevin, you're a real automotive man. VW have just figured out some technology to increase battery life by 50%. Interesting enough, that's still using lithium-ion batteries. When in fact, if you look at lithium, it's highly explosive, it's a real issue with sustainability in terms of getting out of the ground and safety. And actually, there's a big question mark as to whether or not lithium is the right product whatsoever. And another example of that, in terms of critical thinking, is the stealth fighter, DARPA. Everybody thought to go faster would actually make it less easy to see. In fact, it was the opposite. They slowed it down. So these mantras really do drive strategy. They wipe things out. They create stasis. And this is the sort of level of thinking I think we need to adopt in this situation. So I think the symptoms of this issue is pride, right? Beware of pride. And so pride is normally when an EQ question's asked and that you get an IQ, you get a load of things which justify the EQ. That's a symptom of pride. I think imposter syndrome is something we need to get comfortable with rather than reject. This feeling that we need to know, but we need to create certainty, I think is unrealistic, which is very much the old past. And I think that those things that propped things up like that were probably short-lived and unsustainable. So I come back to this statement around our level of success will rarely exceed our level of personal development, because we attract success by the people that we become. And so two calls to action. One is consider your actions in terms of profit and relationships and doing the right thing. I think that's something that's run all the way through these 26 sessions. Now, doing the right thing actually means actually challenge some fundamental things. So you and I, Kevin, before we came on this call, had some dialogue around the GDPR thing. That's the sort of thing I think we need to really challenge and keep an open mind, going back to what Tom was saying, because these are sort of multi-level, sort of next level of deception in terms of potentially really preventing us from becoming successful. And quite frankly, GDPR is almost impossible to implement in most organizations. And I think the other thing is, frankly, I'd encourage invite anybody on this call to do the Winning Thinking Masterclass, because it gives you the tools to unravel this thing. I'm shamelessly mentioning that because it gets to the money. It bloody well works. And I think the other thing I'd challenge people on this call as well, look, quite a few people come on this call for networking purposes. This is not a networking call, guys. This is about taking new action. So I think the challenge is for us all to be accountable for our own actions. And that's us sitting around this table, which is the reason why I asked you, Kevin, about what are you going to do differently? And so I've tried to articulate what am I doing differently for what it's worth. And so that'd be my contribution. So I don't know if anybody, Kevin or Tom, want to ask any questions on that or challenge my thinking on that. You're very welcome.
I will challenge that during my summary.
Okay, great. Yeah. Kevin, any thoughts?
No, I mean, look, my thoughts are you're right. The world is the same, but the world is different. And I get a bit frustrated when I hear people say, hey, we're going to have a new leadership now. Yeah. I'm not convinced that's the case, that it's any different than it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, 30 years ago, which is we expect the best leaders. And that's not people at the top of the organization. That's everywhere in the business. Having an open mind and challenging the way we do things, because we can find a better way to do it.
Yeah.
One of the last big projects, manufacturing projects I was involved in was a shipbuilder. And we transformed that business in 14 months. Wasn't me. All I did was create the culture and the opportunity and give the freedom to the team to challenge the way that we'd been building boats. And they transform the business. And will we operate in a different market? Yes and no. But there's too many boats and not enough market has been the case forever.
Yeah.
But nobody had actually. What were the words somebody used? Simple change in perspective provides a powerful outcome.
Yeah.
The change in perspective was saying, guys, let's stand back. We've got to move quickly because we're going bust here. The reality was we were going bust.
Yeah.
So we've got to move quickly, but let's think about it in a different way.
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that that's any different now as it was. It's still relevant. 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 500 years ago, the best leaders challenged and found new ways.
Yeah.
And we need to continue to learn.
I think what I've noticed is that that organisations do have the right core skills. In fact, I think there's a really interesting question as to what's the limitation of anybody. And I include the person who's making the sandwiches in the organisation. No disrespect for people making sandwiches, but for the CEO, I think there's very little limitation on anybody. And I think the challenge is actually with a few subtle changes, you can make some dramatic differences. So I think that's where the money is in terms of continuing this discussion, Kevin, but that's fine. Thank you for that. So David McLean, over to you, sir. What are your thoughts? Time's running on. I don't want to put you under too much pressure. I know you don't like too much pressure, David.
Thank you for the guests as well. And I just want to talk a little bit on failure to take action, or to kind of move that on as well and taking new action. And what you've been saying, Kevin, basically, I mean, you've certainly been taking new action, and there's no doubt about that. And I like what you're saying in terms of the 100-day plan that you're talking about. It's not as if it's at the end of the 100 days, something's going to happen. You're actually taking action on minute one of day one, and that's how your plan is going to work. So, and I believe the study that I've done in terms of psychology, there's a science to getting rich. There's a science to winning. There's a science to success, and there's certain key elements that we have to have, and it's not difficult. But you must roll them out. And kind of to quote you a little bit there, Kevin, as well, in terms of honesty, openness, communication, courage, clarity, I'd add an autonomy, which I think you more or less touched on. But I believe that the most important thing is what you talked about there, and I've wrote it in capital letters, how you're feeling. Can you feel like a successful business? Can you make sure that you feel? Because that's ultimately how we start. I talk about the science of success, but there's a science to being a successful individual as well. and something that I quote often about thoughts create feelings, feelings create actions, and then the actions ultimately produce our results. And what I don't often talk about, I don't think on here, is that the way forward, I suppose, I can't think of the word, but the way forward is that we must be, is be, do, have. So we must become who we want to be, so that we can then do what we need to do to have what we want. And most people forget about the be. Most people go straight to action. And of course, we talk about new action and the importance of that. And as Ton said, imperfect action, which I completely agree with as well. But let's get the changes within ourselves. Let's allow ourselves, let's give autonomy to the individuals that need it. Let's re-energize people again, to quote you, Kevin, and let's make sure that we allow people to have that confidence. And again, a kind of rough question to ask is, how do you keep these energy levels up? It's a serotonin production. That's what it is. That's the wonder chemicals that we all produce. We've been doing for about 1.5 million years, so we're pretty good at it. But we need to do the same things. We need to do that, which is positive thinking, positive interaction, and physical activity. That wholeness within ourselves, that allows us to become that individual, allows us to be who we need to be, to then take the action, to then get the results that we want to get. So there we are. Whistle stop tour.
Lovely. Thank you, David. Brilliant.
And I'm just going to say that there is actually no questions. So to the audience, if anyone would like to ask any quick questions at the moment, I have none at the moment. So if anyone would like to ask any now, then please do that just now.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's expedient. So great. So with that, Ton, over to you just to summarise this discussion. I'd like to thank Kevin very much for your contribution. I think we've had 4 very different contributions. I think it's the differences where the money is. But Ton, over to you. What do you think the main takeaways are out of this discussion?
Well, just a few things that I think are worth remarking. Not so much by sense of summary, but just a few concepts that came along. You mentioned pride. I think the pride issue is very important. It's something I take on board myself now by just opening up my mind even more than I thought I did before. And you mentioned we think we know things, but actually we don't really know. But it's the other way around as well. I think. There's a lot of stuff that we do know, but we don't know that we know them. And if that's what the Winning Thinking program can actually unlock within teams, it can be extremely, extremely valuable. With respect to Kevin's remarks, I think it's good to have some sort of a structure. I like the defend, attack concept. With the communication towards your own people to make that happen, especially in terms of defending, getting back on your core business, redefining your purpose, redefining what you're actually good at, what is difficult to copy for others, and also look at then your model and start pricing and charging for that as well, because that's the only way I think to survive, instead of giving stuff away for free. It is a different crisis. I don't think, in all fairness, crisis is the right word. This is something that was luring there, like Kevin also has said, 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. We still do expect the same from our leaders, helping us to guide us through this environment that we're all living in. But I do believe that the old concepts and the old models, and whether they are deceptions or bullshit, it's for me neither here nor there. It's clearly important that we come to a situation where we are more flexible and be able to do what the market and what our environment wants. And I really like that analogy of the jazz band, where you have no right whatsoever to exist in a club. You can only play as long as your audience like what you are playing. And if I explain this concept to others, I tend to also mention the opposite of it, which is the old concept of having sheet music, having a partiture where you then try to find a number of players to play exactly that music that you have written or someone else has composed. But if after 1 day or 1 year or a decade that changes, you still have the same players, and you're not able to play a different piece of music. That's why this old piece of music, this old partiture, this old composition of annual budget, 3 years plans, fixed strategies that are written in stone are no longer I think, valid going forward. It's rolling forecasts, it's scenario thinking, it's getting different people in your team that help you think different. That's what we are thinking, what I think is what we're looking for. So that's my, takeout from this conversation.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. I've nothing to add to that. Any final thoughts, Kevin, that you'd add to that?
No, I mean, look, conversations like this are always fun. You made the point that the value comes at the intersection, and listening to, different thoughts, different ideas, different comments. I mean, I've got a page of notes here, and I've got ideas that I've taken away from some of the things you've said and Tom said, and what David said. So I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Kevin. It's a pleasure to have you here, and thank you, Tom. Really, really appreciate your time and your contribution today. As I say, I'd like to encourage us to continue taking action and continue this communication as well. Because I think the people that will survive are the people that collaborate and take new action. So I'd like to encourage this dialogue to continue, even if it means a few ad hoc telephone calls or whatever, but let's make things happen. So thanks very much, Kevin. It's been a real pleasure to get your perspective. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.